The air crackled with the aftermath of a storm, not the kind that raged outside, but the one that had just erupted within the confines of our home. Peter stood across the room, his face a mask of thunderous fury, each word a jagged shard of ice. "You're selfish. You only think of yourself." His accusations echoed in the silence that followed, each one a fresh wound. Years of simmering resentment, of unspoken disappointments and unmet expectations had finally boiled over. The carefully constructed facade of our marriage, the one we presented to the world, lay shattered on the floor. "And you're a hypocrite," I retorted, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and hurt. "You preach about commitment, yet you're never home. You're always chasing some elusive deal, sacrificing everything for your career." The argument spiraled out of control, fueled by years of pent-up emotions. We hurled accusations at each other, each word a venomous dart aimed at the heart. By the time the storm finally subsided, leaving a trail of wreckage in its wake, a chasm had opened between us, a chasm that I feared might be impossible to bridge. Dejected and defeated, I fled the battlefield, seeking solace in the familiar comforts of my office. The sterile environment, with its sterile white walls and the rhythmic hum of the air conditioning, offered a stark contrast to the emotional turmoil raging within me. I sank into my chair, the leather cold against my skin, and stared blankly at the computer screen, the words blurring before my eyes. My phone buzzed. A text message from Jackson, my colleague. "Hey Jane, hope you're having a good evening. Anything interesting happening at the office lately?" Jackson, always the easygoing one, the one who could always make you smile, even on the darkest of days. I typed a quick reply. "Not much. Just another day in paradise." He responded almost immediately. "Sounds rough. Want to grab coffee tomorrow? Maybe we can commiserate over our shared misery." The invitation was unexpected, but strangely appealing. The thought of escaping the suffocating atmosphere of my home, of sharing my frustrations with someone who wouldn't judge me, was strangely comforting. "Sure," I replied. "That would be nice." The next morning, I found myself drawn to Jackson like a moth to a flame. He listened patiently as I poured out my frustrations, his eyes filled with empathy. He didn't offer unsolicited advice or try to fix me. He simply listened, offering a shoulder to lean on, a comforting presence in the midst of my emotional storm. As we talked, I realized that I was drawn to him not just for his empathy, but for his genuine kindness, his infectious laughter, and his easygoing nature. He was a breath of fresh air, a stark contrast to the suffocating atmosphere of my marriage. As the day progressed, an unexpected connection blossomed between us. We shared stories, laughed, and even teased each other, a lightness returning to my heart that I hadn't felt in years. It was a fleeting moment of joy, a reminder that life could still offer moments of beauty and connection, even amidst the wreckage of my marriage. Our coffee meetings became a daily ritual, a much-needed escape from the monotony of my work and the suffocating atmosphere of my home. We would meet in the quiet corner of the coffee shop, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee a comforting backdrop to our conversations. We talked about everything and nothing, sharing our dreams, our fears, our frustrations. He listened intently as I recounted the latest episode in the ongoing saga of my failing marriage, his eyes filled with concern. He shared his own struggles, his anxieties about his career, his loneliness despite being surrounded by people. With each passing day, the bond between us deepened. The initial attraction, fueled by shared misery, evolved into something more profound. We found ourselves drawn to each other's company, our conversations becoming more intimate, more revealing. We shared our deepest secrets, our vulnerabilities, the parts of ourselves we rarely, if ever, showed to others. The line between friendship and something more began to blur. A playful touch on the arm, a lingering gaze, a shared laugh that seemed to last forever. These small gestures, initially innocent, now carried a subtle electric charge, a thrilling sense of forbidden danger. One afternoon, while discussing a particularly challenging project, I leaned in closer, my breath catching in my throat. Our eyes met, a silent conversation passing between us. The air crackled with unspoken desires, the tension palpable. Suddenly he leaned in, his eyes searching mine. Our lips met, a soft, tentative touch that quickly ignited into a passionate kiss. The world around us seemed to fade away, replaced by the intoxicating sensation of his lips on mine. The kiss was a revelation, a forbidden fruit that tasted sweeter than I could have ever imagined. It was a rebellion against the constraints of my marriage, a defiant act of defiance against the suffocating monotony of my life. Guilt gnawed at me, a persistent whisper in the back of my mind. I was betraying Peter, betraying myself. But the thrill of the forbidden, the intoxicating rush of passion, quickly overshadowed any lingering guilt. In the aftermath of the kiss, an awkward silence descended upon us. We looked at each other, our eyes wide with a mixture of shock and exhilaration. "I shouldn't have," he whispered, his voice hoarse. I don't regret it," I confessed, my voice trembling. He reached for my hand, his touch sending shivers down my spine. "Me neither." From that moment on, everything changed. The office, once a sterile and impersonal environment, now pulsed with a forbidden energy. Our stolen glances, our whispered conversations, the lingering touches, they all carried an electric charge, a thrilling sense of danger. We became masters of deception, our clandestine meetings a thrilling game of cat and mouse. We would meet in empty conference rooms, steal moments in the break room, our conversations punctuated by the nervous glances over our shoulders. The passion grew with each passing day, a consuming fire that threatened to engulf us. We spent hours lost in each other's arms, whispering promises of forever, oblivious to the potential consequences. The illusion of escape was intoxicating. In Jackson's arms, I felt alive, truly alive, for the first time in years. The weight of my unhappy marriage, the suffocating monotony of my life, seemed to fade into insignificance. The affair blossomed into a full-blown romance. Our clandestine meetings became more frequent, more passionate. We would spend hours lost in each other's arms, whispering promises of forever, oblivious to the potential consequences. We became experts at creating our own private world, a world shielded from the prying eyes of our colleagues and the judgment of society. We would steal away to secluded corners of the city, exploring hidden cafes, strolling through parks hand in hand, pretending that nothing else mattered. In Jackson's arms, I felt alive, truly alive, for the first time in years. The weight of my unhappy marriage, the suffocating monotony of my life, seemed to fade into insignificance. He made me laugh, he challenged my intellect, he saw the real me, the vibrant, passionate woman I had buried beneath the weight of domesticity and resentment. Guilt, of course, continued to gnaw at me. I was betraying Peter, betraying myself. But I rationalized my actions, convincing myself that I was a victim, trapped in a loveless marriage, suffocating in a life that had long since lost its spark. I told myself that I deserved happiness, that I deserved to be loved and cherished. Jackson, sensing my internal struggle, would gently reassure me. "You don't have to justify yourself to anyone," he would say, his voice a soothing balm to my troubled soul. "You deserve to be happy." His words, laced with understanding and compassion, further fueled my self-deception. I convinced myself that I was finally free from the chains of a loveless marriage, free to embrace the joy that life had to offer. The illusion of escape was intoxicating. We built a fantasy world, a world where our love was the only reality. We ignored the warning signs, the subtle cracks that began to appear in our carefully constructed facade. At work, my focus began to wane. My mind would drift, replaying our last encounter, imagining our next. Deadlines were missed, projects were delayed, and my once sharp mind seemed clouded by a haze of passion. My relationship with Peter continued to deteriorate. The tension in the house was palpable, the air thick with unspoken resentments. Our conversations were reduced to terse exchanges, punctuated by icy silences. I avoided him whenever possible, seeking solace in Jackson's arms, in the intoxicating illusion of our perfect love. The cracks began to show in my personal life as well. I became increasingly absent-minded, forgetting appointments, neglecting household chores. My once vibrant social life dwindled, replaced by clandestine meetings with Jackson. One evening, while getting ready for a dinner party, I noticed a lipstick stain on Jackson's shirt. Panic surged through me, my heart pounding against my ribs. Was he seeing someone else? The thought was unbearable, the jealousy a sharp, agonizing pain. I confronted him later that evening, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. He assured me that it was just a coincidence, that he hadn't been with anyone else. But the seed of doubt had been planted, a corrosive poison that began to erode the foundation of our fragile trust. The illusion of happiness began to crumble, replaced by a gnawing sense of unease. I was caught in a web of my own making, a tangled mess of deceit and self-deception. I had traded the security of a familiar unhappiness for the fleeting promise of a love that might not be as perfect as I had imagined. The fear of losing Jackson, of losing the illusion of happiness I had so desperately clung to, began to consume me. I clung to him more tightly, demanding more of his time, more of his attention. But the more I clung, the further he seemed to slip away. The cracks in the facade were widening, threatening to shatter the illusion I had so carefully constructed. I knew deep down that I was playing a dangerous game, a game that was bound to end in disaster. But the intoxicating allure of forbidden love blinded me to the inevitable consequences. I clung to the hope that I could have it all, a passionate love affair, and a seemingly stable marriage. But the truth was, I was living a lie. A fragile house of cards built on deceit and self-deception. The inevitable confrontation loomed on the horizon, a dark storm cloud gathering on the horizon. I knew that sooner or later, my carefully constructed world would come crashing down, leaving me to face the consequences of my choices. The inevitable confrontation arrived with the force of a tidal wave, crashing over me, leaving me gasping for breath. It began subtly with a misplaced earring, a late-night phone call that I couldn't explain, a lingering scent of another woman's perfume on my clothes. Peter, initially dismissive, began to notice the subtle shifts in my behavior. The distracted air, the sudden mood swings, the late nights at the office. His suspicions, initially dormant, began to stir, fueled by a growing sense of unease. One evening, as we sat at the dinner table, the silence between us thick with unspoken tension, he finally confronted me. "Jane," he began, his voice calm but steely, "something's going on. You've been acting strange lately." I met his gaze, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I don't know what you're talking about," I stammered, my voice trembling. But the lie, flimsy and transparent, crumbled under the weight of his unwavering gaze. He saw the fear, the guilt, the desperation etched on my face. "Don't lie to me, Jane," he said, his voice rising. "I know something's wrong." The dam broke. Tears streamed down my face as I confessed everything, the clandestine meetings, the stolen kisses, the intoxicating illusion of escape. I poured out my heart, confessing my guilt, my shame, my fear. Peter listened in stunned silence, his face a mask of pain and betrayal. When I finished, he sat motionless for what seemed like an eternity, the silence more deafening than any words. Finally he spoke, his voice a low growl. "So it's true. All those late nights, all those excuses, it was him." The anger in his eyes was terrifying, a raw, primal emotion that threatened to consume him. He rose from the table, his chair scraping against the floor, and paced the room like a caged animal. "How could you?" he roared, his voice echoing through the house. "After all these years, after everything we've been through?" His words were like daggers piercing my heart. I cowered under the weight of his anger, my apologies a feeble whisper in the face of his wrath. The ensuing days were a blur of accusations, recriminations, and bitter recriminations. Our home, once a haven of comfort, became a battlefield, each word a fresh wound. The news of my affair spread through the office like wildfire. a venomous gossip that poisoned my reputation. My colleagues, once friendly, now avoided me, their eyes filled with pity or disdain. My career, once on the rise, plummeted. The illusion of happiness shattered, leaving me to face the devastating consequences of my choices. The affair, once a thrilling escape, now felt like a poisoned chalice, leaving me with nothing but pain and regret. I was left to pick up the pieces of my shattered life, to grapple with the wreckage of my marriage, my career, and my self-respect. The guilt gnawed at me, a constant, insidious companion, reminding me of the pain I had caused. I sought solace in solitude, retreating into a shell of self-imposed isolation. The world seemed to shrink, the vibrant colors fading into shades of gray. I spent hours staring out the window, lost in a sea of regret, wondering how I had let things go so wrong. The future seemed bleak, uncertain. The possibility of reconciliation with Peter seemed remote, the trust irrevocably broken. My career lay in ruins, my reputation tarnished. I was a woman adrift, lost in a sea of despair. But amidst the despair, a flicker of hope began to emerge. The realization that I had to take responsibility for my actions, that I had to learn from my mistakes.